Welcome to the Relationship Cycle with Jorge and Nelsa, where we discuss dating and other significant relationships. Welcome back, everyone. We're so glad you're able to be with us. Our topic today, Poppy, is divorce.
Oh, man.
We know a lot about that, don't we?
We know a little bit about that. We got personal experience from both sides on that.
Absolutely. And we really just wanted to have a conversation. Usually we bring in experts. We talk about facts and figures, but we thought tonight would be just a personal show for us to kind of cover, what it's like, the trials and tribulations.
There's definitely some of that, but and also, unfortunately, I feel like a lot of people can relate to us on some of these, conversation points that we're going to hit. Like, I feel that in society, in religion, just in the world as a whole, like the whole divorce thing has a very, very negative connotation, right?
Right. The fact that, we even think trials and tribulations when you think about divorce. But for some people, honestly, it's a sense of freedom. It's a sense of liberation and finding yourself again. So, we want to be able to kind of objectively, as much as we can, subjectively, objectively talk about, what our divorce journey was like. How long have you been divorced, Poppy?
So my divorce became final October of 2021.
Last year, so not a year yet, right?
Not even a year. So basically the month that we started the podcast. Look at that. Look at that.
You had a lot to say.
I had a lot on my mind. Let's just say that I had a gorilla off my back.
Well, and it's not like by the time I think people are divorced, and people meaning me, a lot of things have transpired. Like, I think sometimes people see divorce as, the blow up at the end, but sometimes there are little things that have kind of chipped away at the relationship over time. Earlier in our pregame discussion, we were just talking about how you don't just wake up one morning and say, I want to be divorced. Like,
right.
Most reasonable people, I think, don't really do that. But,
seldomly, very seldomly. Right. To me, the way I felt is that as time went on and as the drift started to take place between me and my wife, and you could almost feel that we were kind of growing apart.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, right?
Yeah.
And you could feel it, and it's real. And you feel it because when you start feeling those sensations, that's when you start kicking around that idea. Mm-hmm. Because a happy person doesn't kick around the idea of leaving their partner.
Right.
Usually people that start kicking that idea around are people who just don't feel completely fulfilled, or just don't feel happy.
Right. And I also think too, just discussing that point of happiness, like, I think people who have never been divorced sometimes think, well, everything takes work. Everything is not pie in the sky. Everything is not always going to be a good day. But I think when you get to that place, it's like you've exhausted, at least for me personally, I felt like I had exhausted every means I knew to make things better from my point of view. I felt like we had settled into this sort of roommate routine. Oof. As opposed to, and that's the drift you're talking about. Like, I could really identify with that because it wasn't arguing. There was no argument. There was no, major issues,
right.
For like some people, substance abuse or, physical abuse or whatever. He was really a nice person. And, but there was that drift where it felt like I kept wanting to expand and do more in a different direction than he did.
Right.
And, compatibility, even where, what you used to do together doesn't feel so together anymore, or you're about two different things, wanting to do two different things. Even your thought process about things is different. It's a little different for the two of us. I'm a mom,
right.
There were children involved. And for you, there were no children.
Right. So my decision Yeah, I mean, it made it very easy, but at the same time, there's that dilemma that anytime you go through a divorce, change is coming.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to what levels, to what depths, don't know. But my dilemma mainly was that I knew that if I was going to divorce, then I was going to have to change my whole routine.
Mm-hmm.
And more than likely, I was going to have to inconvenience my family. And on top of that, I was going to have to do away with my biggest accomplishment and asset that I had, which was my house that I bought.
Mm-hmm.
And that really was hard for me because, I'm what? At that time, I would have been about 32 years old, and I had put my life savings into this house because I bought that house with my money, not to, be so transparent and forthcoming with that. But that's the reality. I literally used my life savings to buy our house.
Mm-hmm.
And not that she wouldn't have been able to kick in, but she was in school.
Mm-hmm.
So she wasn't working. So I was pretty much the breadwinner as far as buying the house. And that definitely gave me a lot of pause and reservation that, man, like the way that I was seeing everything, if I were to make this power move, I'm going to have to walk away from this house along with the marriage.
Right.
And I've had a lot of people ask me, well, why didn't you just keep the house? And I'm like, well, I'm epileptic. I can't live alone.
Mm-hmm.
So even that was like another layer into my decision making that, okay, even if I do divorce, I can't live in this house by myself. And I'm sure I probably could have figured something out, but it's still a risk for me because what if I can get somebody that I trust to come live with me?
Right.
Then that would open up another can of worms. So and to be fair, I was the one that decided to walk away. So to me, it just felt unfair that I was the one initiating and walking away from the marriage. I did not have the heart to be like, okay, you need to leave my house now.
Right.
So I was like, look, I put it on her court. I said, look, this is where I stand and this is where I feel, or what I feel, that we're no longer in love with each other and we're not happy and we're toxic and we have to divorce. So I told her, you can either keep the house and then we'll sit down and figure out what you're going to pay me for it as far as my equity portion. Or if you don't want the house and you don't want that responsibility, then me and my family can take it and we'll figure something out. So I put it on her court, and obviously she chose to keep the house like a smart girl.
Right. Especially in this market. Oh my
I mean,
gosh.
at that time, the market was stable, but it was definitely not on and popping like it is right now.
Right. Exactly.
But you know what? I had a good friend that I would talk to. She was a elderly woman from my work, and she was one of the few people that I really took her advice to heart because she kind of, we had this conversation. I told her what was going on in my personal life. And she mentioned that, don't worry too much about the material stuff because your peace and tranquility has no price. And she told me that, and that really hit me.
Yeah.
And then she's like, because think about it. Once you move on and once you get settled back in, you could always buy another house. But your peace and tranquility,
you can't replace it, right?
That has no price.
Right.
Because I tell people all the time, I'm the happiest that I've ever been in my life. And listen, don't get me wrong, the marriage was good in the beginning, but then those last 2 years was a struggle. And I knew that was a struggle because I would be at work on a Friday night dreading to go home. And not because she was a bad person. I don't ever want to make it seem like that. But the tension was there. It was almost like walking on eggshells.
Yeah.
That constant feeling of walking on eggshells. And I knew that it was time to make some big decisions where we couldn't even agree where to go eat without peacefully agreeing somewhere.
Yeah.
But I tell people all the time, I learned a lot from my divorce, and I'm a different man from when I was married compared to the new divorced single man that I am now. Like, I've learned so much.
So what do you think one of your main lessons has been?
Well, definitely being more self-sufficient for sure, because I know when I was married, my wife carried a lot of responsibility. Like, she had to do all the cooking. I could barely make eggs.
What?
I kid you not.
Was that amazing shrimp taco I just had with scallops? And oh my gosh, I can't even imagine you not being able to
Listen,
cook.
that was a lot of pressure on her, because she would be the one that would have to figure out what the hell to make, and I would just be like, "What we eating?"
Yeah.
And that was a lot on her. And she basically had to run the whole house by herself, and she worked full time on top of that. So now, obviously, I've learned to cook.
And well,
and listen, I'm definitely not an expert, but I know how to make a couple of things. I know how to put a little meal together if I ever invite somebody over. Also, obviously, becoming more self-reliant. I barely know how to do laundry.
Oh.
I barely know how to do laundry.
You have been spoiled, hey?
I guess so. I guess so. And she was like, yeah, you got to help me.
Yeah.
And now, obviously, looking back at it, I was like, yeah, she carried a lot.
Yeah.
She had to do a lot. That was a lot of responsibility on one woman. And obviously now I do feel much better as far as being self-reliant. And, if I were to enter in a new marriage or new relationship, if she's tired or she doesn't want to cook, I could be like, hey, you know what, babe? I'm a cook. I got you.
Right.
Let me show you these Chef Poppy skills.
Yeah. Right. Oh, it's a lucky woman. It's a lucky woman. I think for me, one of the most difficult pieces of the divorce was being a mom and feeling the guilt of tearing my family apart for my children. It was. And I was not a child of divorce. My parents were together until my dad died. My grandparents on both sides were together until, my grandfathers on either side died first. And so I just knew I was going to grow up and be married to my spouse until death did us part, because I had grown up with that dynamic in my direct line. And when I didn't, I felt tremendously guilty. Like I had wrecked things all to hell for my children. I worried about were they going to be able to bounce back from it. I just had a conversation not too long ago with one of my daughters about how I felt like I was ashamed, and I had always wanted to be such a good mother, but I felt like, did I do something to fuck them up? Did I do something to make them question every relationship they were ever going to have because, ours didn't work out?
Right.
And, my children were younger, of course.
How old were they?
Almost 12 and almost 17. And on top of it, they had just lost their grandfather. It was my older daughter's senior year when, she's getting ready to go into her senior year when we got separated. And I felt like I had completely obliterated what had been a pretty good childhood for her. And then my younger daughter, I felt like, oh my God, I'm putting us in such a really bad position. Like you said, moving back home. I felt ashamed to have to come back to my mama's house because she had never had to go back to her parents' house. And it made me feel like I had really been a big failure. And that was not something that I had been used to in my life. I had not really ever failed what I felt like was failing anything, school, work, whatever, like I did that marriage. And, and I loved my ex. I was in love. It wasn't like I just picked somebody I thought would be okay and be a good, baby daddy. I really felt like this was the person God wanted me to choose. But I can remember my mom always saying, God didn't put everybody together. And, sometimes a relationship was until death do you part, but sometimes the death of the relationship is what's tearing people apart, not the death of our physical bodies.
Gotcha.
And I really do feel like we had served our purpose. And I've recently been able to speak about a lot of the feelings that I wasn't able to talk about at first
Right.
with my ex, and to be able to apologize for what I failed to do. You know, I wasn't a good communicator. I wasn't able to say when something bothered me all the time. I wasn't able to speak up and tell my truth. And I really struggled with codependency, and I was pretty needy, you know, as a wife. You know, I wanted a lot of things that I don't always know necessarily if he was able, or we hadn't negotiated. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Um, there were just a lot of things I think I assumed, maybe he assumed, that we would do that after we started growing in the relationship, we didn't come back to the table and discuss it thoroughly. We didn't discuss it at all
Right.
sometimes. And, you know, we always talk about how vital communication is. And I did not do a good job with that in that relationship. And I think that's one of the lessons that I learned is like, you got to speak up and talk about when things bother you. You've got to talk about what your non negotiables are. You've got to talk about, you know, if things aren't working so well, how long are we going to go with things not going so well before we go get help? Whether it's pastoral counseling, whether it's therapy, whether it's, you know, whatever you need to do. But then there's also the realization that sometimes you outgrow a relationship, whether it's a friendship, a marriage, whatever. And I've had to realize, you know, divorce isn't just the separation from that husband, but I've had friends that, you know, we've grown apart and have had to let the relationship go.
Right.
Um, but I found that to be very painful too. And I think I probably held on 3 years longer than um, maybe I would have, because I really wanted to make sure I tried for my children, that I didn't just, you know, let things slowly dissolve and erode, but I really wanted to say we had given it, you know, all we had. And like you, I was the one who chose to leave. And so, you know, there was the whole, you've created a life with this whole person. You know, you basically essentially marry their family, they marry yours. So there's also the separation of those relationships. And I do feel like we had friends who chose sides
Right.
for a
That
while.
happens. Yeah.
Um, and maybe not because we never really talked about what happened inside our marriage with people. So it wasn't like people felt like, oh, you know, this, that, or the other is going on. And you see them, and everybody thought we were happy. I think people really were devastated to find out that things weren't as great as they had perceived them to be. And um, I think they were very disappointed in knowing that I was the person walking away, because I had been such a model citizen sometimes in
Right.
my life, you know what I'm
Right.
saying? Where, you know, you're trying to do things right. And I was a real big people pleaser. So I didn't want to disappoint people, including my ex. But I was just like, I didn't recognize myself anymore. I felt like I had
Lost yourself.
lost myself.
And
Yeah.
that happens a lot, like not just in marriage, it happens in relationships. And
Hmm.
I can honestly say that I lost myself because I had people that were close to me who would tell me, like, yeah, you didn't look like the same version of
Hmm.
yourself. Like it looked like you were different.
Hmm.
You weren't as happy go lucky and outgoing and
Hmm.
laughing like you usually do.
Right.
And people notice that.
Yeah.
They may not tell you to your face, but obviously once they saw
Hmm.
that I had made that move, then they kind of started piecing things together. Like, okay, he was going through some rough shit
Right. Right.
because the marriage just wasn't going well. But I tell people all the time, like, look, me and her, we had some good memories. We were together for 10 years. We
Yeah.
dated for 5 years. We were married for 5 years. We did some good things.
Hmm.
So I don't ever want to take that away from her. And, it's important to also remember the good. Like,
Yes, absolutely.
I don't like to walk away from the marriage and just take all the bad. There was definitely some good.
Mhm,
Her family was good to me.
mhm.
So I never had any issues with that.
Alright, same here.
So I can't say a bad thing about her family. They were good people, and they always supported us. Whenever we needed that support, and my family too. My family never,
Mhm,
did anything bad to her. We were very amicable. But the problem is that sometimes you may meet that person at that particular age, and then time goes by and you maybe evolve or
Right.
change,
Right.
and they may not evolve and change with you, whether
Right.
it be for the betterment or for the worse.
Yeah.
And sometimes that happens where you level up, but the person that you're in a dating or relationship, they're stagnant or they're not evolving with you.
Or satisfied,
Or content.
content.
Yeah,
Yeah.
content. Let me ask you. So, well, I do want to put this out there, right? Even though full disclosure, I do not have any children,
Hmm.
but there's a lot of people who know about this topic. And for the people who really struggle about the whole tearing the family apart, there's a lot of people, experts, who would argue that you're doing more detrimental damage to the
Hmm.
children by keeping them in a toxic, bad environment.
Yeah, especially if there's a lot of negative energy going back and forth. I would say so too. But I will say my children have actually told me and their dad, like, what in the world? Y'all aren't even compatible. Like,
Mm.
seeing us apart and, versus their memories of us together. Like, they see him being a happier person, they see me being a happier
Wow.
person, and they've really become much more resilient. They'll tell you they've been to therapy. They don't mind talking about it. And in fact, they encourage their friends that they should go and get therapy. They're very
Right.
forward-thinking young women. And I, again, I still felt a lot of guilt. I still check in with them about how they feel about things, but they were like, "No, we would not change it." Um, you know, because we see the two of you and how much you have grown since that moment
Wow,
in
that's
time.
impressive.
Yeah. But it was about staying in communication with them, making sure I stayed tapped in. And, one thing that I tried so hard, and I can't say that every day was a great day where I was at the best at it, but I never wanted to bad talk their dad in front of them. And to his credit, I feel like he did not do that to me either.
Good. Good.
So that we could stay a team, because we're still going to be parents. We're still,
Absolutely.
one day, hopefully, we're going to have grandchildren and, sons-in-laws or whatever. But I didn't want to make him a monster to my children. I didn't want to keep him away from my children, because he had been a decent dad. He had been there for them. Um, and, to his credit, I think his relationship with them has evolved to the point where I think it's improved even since our divorce.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I think that's where you got to tap into, like you said, what is the good of the situation? Um, what was good? And he and I always say, if we had not been together, our children wouldn't be here. And those are the biggest blessings of our lives. And it was meant to be for them to come through us. And so, I always feel good about that. I always feel good that, even though we may not have made every choice right as a parenting team, um, together or divorced,
Right.
but we are still a team in parenting our children. We still, and again, I think our communication has improved by leaps and bounds, honestly, from where we were sometimes as a married couple. Um, but it's still not like, I think we both come to terms and we both closed the chapter in our life where we saw, the difficulty sometimes in the relationship. And even though we'd have good times, those difficulties would still kind of rear their heads. And once I really walked into who I was and who I'd evolved into and owned it, like, there was no way I feel like I could have stayed in that particular relationship, because I had changed so much that I would have had to put myself kind of back in a box. And I couldn't see doing that anymore. So, and again, not just with that marriage, but with other relationships that,
Right.
you know, changed as well. But it's not easy. And I think just because you initiate it, sometimes people feel um, I, like you don't have regrets about the person, and like you don't suffer the loss of that, loss of that intimacy. the loss of that support, the loss of just the normalcy that you had.
We're creatures of habit. Humans are
Right.
creatures of habit, and I had to move. So when I, left the marriage, I had to move. I used to live in Steel Creek, where I had my home, and then I had to move in with my parents over here in North Charlotte. So it was like a 30-minute, drive. And my job, I used to work in Fort Mill, so now I'm like going further and further away from my job. But the way I explained to my parents, like, look, I've been kicking this around for a while, and I was miserable. Like the last few years, I was miserable.
I bet your parents didn't know. Mine didn't.
Oh no, listen, my parents would ask me all the time, but me being, trying to be brave and trying to protect them from my bullshit, I would be like, everything's fine or I'm good, because my mom worries enough with me because of my epilepsy. I didn't want to give her any more worries or unnecessary worries. And I figured, hey, it's my marriage. I need to figure it out. I don't need my mama to be worrying about that,
Exactly.
But I urge people that if you're genuinely miserable and you are not happy, then find your fucking happiness.
Yeah.
And
Life is too short.
And don't fuck with happy. You ever heard of that?
I have not, but I like it.
Don't fuck with happy. If you're happy and married, then good. Stay happy and be married. But if you are not happy and you are miserable, then do whatever it is you need to do to find that happiness. Because let me tell you, you don't want to wait till it's too late and then you're 70, 80 years old and trying to find your happiness. Well, shit, by that time you got one foot in the grave, man.
Right. Exactly.
And I feel that I have done the right thing because, number one, I just genuinely feel happy and well, but also people close to me tell me, man, you look so damn happy. Like, you really live life. And
glowing.
I'm like,
you're glowing.
Yeah, absolutely. People are like, yo, you really look like you enjoy life. And I'm like, yeah, that's the point. Like, you got to live like you're dying because you really are.
You really are.
And listen, I was already pretty cognizant of that, but surviving the pandemic and seeing how that took a lot of lives and destroyed a lot of families, if that doesn't give you an idea of how precious life is, I don't know what would.
What would, yeah. And you know what? And I love him enough to want to see him happy. And I knew as I was getting miserable and less like who I felt like I was, that was impacting him, whether you want to admit it or not. Like, if you really love the other person and you aren't able to give them your best self, you're not really doing a service to them by staying in something just because everybody stayed in a marriage. Well, a lot of those people didn't have choices in previous generations, and now it's like you said, like there's so much that's happened in front of our faces. Like, I didn't want either of us to be somewhere suffering and just getting by. I felt like if you're going to be together, I want more bliss than I want piss. I just coined that today, ladies and gentlemen. Please see my copyright notice. But when you get to that place where you're starting to count your days up and your good days are not outweighing your bad, then like the gospel song, he says, I won't complain because my good outweighs my bad. But if it's opposite, you got to really take stock of stuff. Like, you can't sit on that. And I think our bodies, like, just like you said, I've had people tell me, how I seem to be, changed. And when I look at pictures, I was almost 200 pounds. I was on 2 blood pressure medicines. I'm not saying it was from the marriage. It was a lot going on during that time. And those things, I think, were contributing factors as well. But I'm not having the same issues as I chase my bliss. And it's not about being with another person. It wasn't about anything but me. And my dad had died, and I thought to myself, if you died today, would you be okay? Would you feel like you've done what you needed to do? And it really made me face my own mortality and the fact that I wasn't happy the way I had thought I would be. And I couldn't live like that. I couldn't live with that. No.
I remember I would go work out or even just, during quiet time or just laying my head on the pillow, and I would be like, how long can I continue doing this? Because I literally felt like I was living a lie.
Yeah.
Not the whole marriage, but towards the end of it, when I knew that I was really considering, like.
All right, we had a little bit of technical difficulty, but you were saying, Poppy, how you felt like, you were living a lie.
Yeah, like I literally felt like I was living a facade, and I hated that because you try to, almost like you're playing house and you're trying to, put on the happy face, and then you get back to the house and that happy face instantly goes away. And I just hated that feeling. And this was towards the end, obviously, and not the whole marriage, but those last 2 years when I really was contemplating, like, okay, if I were to do this, how can I go about doing this? What are the ramifications? What are the pros and cons, et cetera, et cetera? Yeah. But it's the best thing I've ever did. Okay. I literally can say that my biggest lesson from my divorce is find your happiness, whatever that is. Like, you need to sit down, write it down, look in the mirror and be like, okay, what makes me happy? And then go after it.
Excellent advice. And I can only amen that.
Listen, it doesn't mean you don't have to be rich. You don't have to be an IG model, whatever. Just literally be honest with yourself and be like, hey, what makes me happy? Yeah. What brings me happiness is good friendships, living, in the moment, cooking, eating good. That stuff makes me happy. Yeah. So guess what I do? Right. I do as much of that as I can.
Podcasting
makes me happy. That too. That is a new discovery that I've made in the past year or so, that I really enjoy podcasting.
But again, it's like you say, but if you don't seek after that, and for me, the word is really joy. Because happy can be up or down, for me, but joy, like, even when things aren't great, I still feel like my life is where I thought it would be, or it's moving closer to what I thought it would be. And again, not that it was a horrible life that I lived as a married woman. It wasn't. It was a lot of good.
Good.
And I feel like I can be at peace with that now.
Right.
But it did take me forgiving myself for what I felt like was a failure, where I had failed to make it better, to make it work. And I think that's a part of anything moving forward, is that not only forgiving the other people for whatever they contributed to that place, but forgiving yourself, because I made decisions as a 20-something-year-old that my 40-something-year-old self would maybe do differently.
Right.
But when you look at hindsight, it's always 20/20 vision. Everything's crystal clear.
Monday morning quarterback. Everybody loves playing that role.
But when it's live time and you're in the middle of those decisions, you're in the middle of those feelings, like, it's so different. Right. And so I had to stop beating my 20-something-year-old self up because she was in love madly with this person, and things changed. I couldn't keep holding myself hostage for something that was the right thing in my 20s and 30s, but changed after a major life event, So I think, people keep that in mind as you're thinking about, where your relationship is, do your due diligence, try to communicate with each other to keep, the fire burning. And more than that, like, check in with yourself, like you're saying, like, are you happy? Do you ask yourself, what does happy look like for me? There's some people, they don't even know what kind of ice cream they like, much less if they're happy in a relationship or not.
Yeah.
But I think you've really got to be honest with yourself first. And if you feel like I'm all happy breezy in front of everybody, but when we get home, we don't even talk, we're not making love, we're not making plans, we're not growing, we're not building anything together, you got to really take some stock. And I'm not saying all those things were my issues, but I've seen couples that play the game, but the wife is just dogging him out everywhere she goes. The husband's dogging her out everywhere he goes. And she's like, what are y'all doing? Like, really, y'all don't think this is, some people are like better or worse, and they're going to go down that worst path and ride it until the wheels fall off.
Let's not get it twisted. Like, everybody goes through rough patches when they're in marriages and relationships. But to me, a rough patch
should end eventually.
It's temporary.
Right. Yeah.
But a rough patch shouldn't be years.
Yeah.
You know, rough patch can be, you know, hey, a disease or a sickness or, you know, job loss or, you know, my mama died and I hadn't been the same since, stuff like that. Hey, we're going to get through it, you know. But like just years of toxic energy and arguing and fighting and just being down each other's throat, man, that shit gets old, man. Like I just cannot envision, I could not envision doing that forever. Like this is not what my forever looks like.
Or silence, you know, because some people aren't fighting.
Yeah.
Some people aren't talking.
Right.
You know, they aren't sleeping in the same room. Some people aren't, you know, it looks different for everybody. And I think that's why we're saying you really need to take stock about your situation and see what are your non-negotiables and what are the things that you can live with, that if we could work on it, things could maybe get better. But, you know, I'm not sure. It takes two. It always takes two.
It takes two to tango, but
good or bad.
Yeah. But you know what? This was a good conversation.
Absolutely.
I think it's important to have this. And you know, for some people, listen, this is how you find your happiness.
Okay.
You got to make that bold move.
Sometimes,
and it's tough. It's rough, and you may have to give some sacrifices. You probably gonna piss some people off. And you know, some people are going to be frustrated, or some people are going to be like, why are you doing this? But at the end of the day, is whether you are happy and enjoying life or not. And if you are not, then you need to find the answer to that.
Amen, my friend. Amen. No more than that needs to be said, other than thank you all again for joining us. If you have any show ideas you'd like to share with us, please email us at jorgeandnelsa@gmail.com and check out our website at therelationshipcycle.com.
Thanks for joining us today on The Relationship Cycle with Jorge and Nelsa. Do you have show ideas? Email us at jorgeandnelsa@gmail.com. Follow us on Spotify or anchor.fm for more great shows.